When a store manager makes the biggest mistake of his career by calling the cops on a teenage girl, only to realize too late that her father holds more power than he ever imagined, it was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the sky turned a warm shade of orange before settling into a deep blue. The local department store was buzzing with last-minute shoppers, some grabbing essentials, others simply browsing. Among them was a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, dressed in casual jeans and a hoodie, her hair tied up in a high puff. She moved through the aisles, running her fingers along the fabric of a new jacket, then checking the price tag. A sigh escaped her lips. Too much. With a small shake of her head, she placed it back and continued walking, unaware that someone had been watching her. From behind a counter, the store manager, a middle-aged man with a stiff posture and a permanent frown, narrowed his eyes. Something about the girl put him on edge. Maybe it was the way she kept looking at the clothes and then glancing around. Maybe it was the fact that she had been in the store for a while without making a purchase. He had seen this before. Teenagers wasting time, or worse, trying to sneak something into their pocket. And in his experience, waiting too long to act usually meant a loss for the store. So when the girl picked up a small accessory, turned it over in her hands, then slipped it back onto the shelf, his suspicion turned into certainty. He reached for the store phone and dialed. "Yeah, we've got a situation," he muttered. "Possible shoplifting. Young girl, black, hoodie. Get here quick." The girl had no idea. She had simply been looking for something she could afford, hoping maybe she'd find a good deal. When she finally settled on a hair clip, she made her way to the counter, pulling out a few crumpled bills from her pocket. But before she could even place them on the counter, a voice rang through the store. "Ma'am, step away from the counter." She turned, startled, as two police officers strode toward her, their expressions firm, her stomach twisted. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "Store manager reported suspicious behavior," one officer said. "We need to check your belongings." Her eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone, who might stand up for her. The other shoppers had paused, watching, whispering. The manager stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his face set like stone. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice cracking. One of the officers sighed. "Then you have nothing to worry about. Just let us take a look." Tears burned the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her hands shook as she unzipped her small purse, showing nothing but her phone, lip gloss, and a few bills. She turned out her hoodie pocket. Empty. She lifted her arms. Nothing. A long silence stretched across the store. The manager's face shifted, his confidence faltering. "She was acting suspicious," he mumbled. The officers exchanged glances. "Sir, do you have any actual evidence she stole something?" The manager hesitated. I thought," a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What exactly did you think?" Heads turned as a tall man in a dark suit strode through the store entrance, his expression unreadable. The girl's face crumpled in relief. "Dad," she whispered. The store manager's face went pale. He recognized that man. Everyone did. "The mayor." The store manager swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He had seen the mayor on TV, shaking hands, giving speeches, cutting ribbons at grand openings, but never in his worst nightmares had he imagined facing him like this, with his own daughter standing in the middle of the store, humiliated, scared, and surrounded by cops. The girl rushed to her father's side, her hands still shaking. "They thought I stole something," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "I didn't do anything, Dad, I swear." The mayor didn't take his eyes off the store manager. His expression was calm, but there was something behind it, something that made the air feel heavier. "You called the cops on my daughter," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Because..." The manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The words were there. He had been so sure just moments ago, but now, under the weight of the mayor's stare, they felt ridiculous. "She was acting suspicious," he finally said, but even he didn't believe it anymore. The mayor let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Suspicious how? By shopping? By picking something up and putting it back like every other customer in this store? His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The weight of his words did all the damage. One of the officers cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Sir, we didn't find anything on her. She cooperated fully." His tone had shifted, careful now, respectful. They knew who they were talking to. The mayor nodded, glancing at his daughter, then back at the officers. And yet, here we are. My daughter, surrounded, treated like a criminal in front of a store full of people because she looked suspicious. The store had gone completely silent. Customers stood frozen in place, some pretending to browse, others staring openly. A woman near the makeup aisle shook her head. An older man by the registers muttered something under his breath. The store manager felt like he was shrinking. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had made a mistake, a big one. "Mr. Mayor, I didn't know she was your daughter," he blurted out, as if that made it better. The mayor's eyes darkened. His daughter let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Oh, so if I was someone else's daughter, this would have been fine." The manager felt heat rise to his face. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," the mayor cut in. He turned to the officers. "Are we done here?" One of them gave a small nod. "Yes, sir. Again, we apologize." The mayor held up a hand. "Don't apologize to me." He looked at his daughter. "Apologize to her." The officers didn't hesitate. "Miss, we're sorry for the misunderstanding," one of them said. "This shouldn't have happened." The mayor's daughter nodded stiffly, her arms wrapped around herself. But then the mayor turned back to the manager. "And you?" The manager felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. His hands were clammy, his heart hammering in his chest. He had been so sure, so convinced that he was right, but now standing here, he could see it clearly. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had humiliated a girl, scared her, made her feel small in a place where she should have been safe. His throat tightened. I'm sorry," he said, the words barely above a whisper. The mayor didn't respond right away. He just stared, long enough for the silence to stretch uncomfortably. Then he placed a hand on his daughter's back, guiding her toward the exit. "Come on, sweetheart, we're leaving." The moment the door swung shut behind them, the tension in the store broke. People murmured, shook their heads. A few gave the manager looks of disappointment before turning away. And just like that, the reality of what he had done settled in. Not just to the mayor's daughter, but to every other kid who had ever stepped into this store and been watched a little too closely, followed down aisles, judged before they even opened their mouths. For the first time in a long time, he felt ashamed. The store manager stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The whispers from the customers hadn't stopped, and every glance in his direction felt like a silent accusation. He had messed up badly. One of the cashiers, a younger guy who had been working there for only a few months, shifted awkwardly behind the counter. He looked like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The other employees kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact, but the tension in the store was thick enough to choke on. Then, out of nowhere, a woman near the entrance spoke up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So what now?" Her voice carried a sharp edge, like she was daring him to answer. The manager swallowed hard. His voice cracked and he had to clear his throat. "I need to get back to work." "What? Back to work?" Another customer let out a scoff, like nothing just happened. His face burned. He turned toward the register, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him standing. He wanted to pretend it was over, that he could just move on, but the weight of it sat in his chest. The assistant manager, a woman named Denise, finally stepped forward. She had been watching everything from the side, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We need to talk," she said, her tone unreadable. "Office, now." The walk to the back room felt like the longest of his life. Every step felt heavy, dragging, like the shame was physically pulling him down. As soon as he stepped inside, Denise shut the door behind them. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "You call the cops on a kid. A kid! Do you have any idea how bad this is? I thought..." His own voice sounded weak, pathetic. She was acting suspicious. She kept picking things up, putting them back. Denise's eyes narrowed. Who? You ever seen a nervous teenager shop before? That's what they do. They wander, they fidget, they second guess every little thing before they buy it. She took a step closer, her jaw tight. But you didn't see a nervous teen, did you? You saw a problem, and you thought you had to handle it. The words stung because she was right. He had jumped to conclusions without even realizing it. Denise let out a heavy breath, shaking her head. You need to fix this. If the mayor goes public with this, we're done. The store, your job, everything. The thought sent a sharp wave of panic through him. I'll apologize again, he said quickly. I'll call him, tell him. Denise shook her head. It's not just about him. It's about her. That girl you embarrassed, scared, humiliated in front of everyone. You need to apologize to her, not just because of her dad, but because it's the right thing to do. He hesitated. Facing the mayor had been one thing, but facing her, the girl he had made feel like a criminal, that was something else entirely. But as much as he wanted to avoid it, he knew Denise was right. He had to make this right, if that was even possible. He stood outside the store, hands trembling slightly as he gripped his phone. The mayor and his daughter hadn't left yet. They were still in the parking lot talking in low voices. He could see the girl wiping her face, her father standing close, protective. The sight twisted something deep in his gut. He had done that. He had made a kid feel unsafe, feel small. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself forward, each step heavier than the last. The closer he got, the more his stomach turned. But there was no backing out now. The mayor saw him approaching first, his eyes sharp, unreadable. His daughter looked up a second later, her expression guarded, wary. Sir, the manager started, his voice uneven. He turned to the girl, his throat tightening, and I'm so sorry, truly. I messed up and I hurt you, and there's no excuse for it. His own words felt clumsy, inadequate. I should have seen you for what you were, a kid just shopping, not a threat. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, studying his face, like she was trying to decide if she believed him. Then, finally, she spoke. Why'd you assume I was? The question hit harder than he expected. Because I was afraid? Because I didn't think? Because somewhere along the way I learned to see people like you differently. He wanted to say something, to explain, but nothing he could say would be good enough. I don't know, he admitted, his voice small. But that's not your problem. It's mine, and I need to do better. She exhaled, her shoulders still tense, but something in her eyes softened just a little. Yeah, she said quietly. You do. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a nod, before turning to the manager. I don't know what's going to happen next, he said, but I know one thing. You better make sure no other kid walks into that store and gets treated the way my daughter did. Ever. The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. The manager nodded, feeling the full weight of them. I will, he said. I swear. As the mayor and his daughter got into their car and drove away, he stood there, watching until they disappeared down the road. The air felt heavier, like everything that had just happened was settling into his bones. He had screwed up in a way that couldn't just be erased with a simple apology, but maybe, just maybe, he could start making things right. The walk back inside the store felt different. Everything looked the same. The shelves, the registers, the customers browsing like nothing had happened. But he wasn't the same. The weight of what he'd done pressed on him with every step. He wasn't sure if an apology was enough, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just let this be another incident that people forgot about in a week. His employees were watching him, some stealing quick glances, others looking away the moment he met their eyes. They knew. Everyone knew. He had spent years running this store, thinking he was a good manager, a fair one, but today proved otherwise. Denise was waiting for him near the stock room, arms still crossed. She didn't have to say a word. He could feel the question in her stare. Well, I need to do better, he said, voice firm, mostly to himself. "We need to do better." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Yeah," she said, "we do." That night, long after the store had closed, he sat in his office, staring at the employee training manuals piled on his desk. They suddenly felt outdated, shallow. The words on those pages had stopped him from making a snap judgment about a teenager who was just trying to shop. They wouldn't stop the next mistake either. So he started writing new policies, new training requirements. He called corporate, scheduled meetings, brought in people who actually knew what they were talking about. It wasn't about covering himself or making sure the store's reputation stayed intact. It was about making sure that no one else, no kid, no customer ever had to feel the way that girl had felt in his store. A few weeks later, the mayor's office received a letter. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't full of excuses. It was a commitment, a promise that things were changing, and it wasn't just words. Because real change doesn't come from apologies alone. It comes from actions. And this time, he was going to make sure those actions mattered.